Okay, so now we are on to our second section of Aristotle, our second section of the recording, rather. And there's something we have to get out of the way with Aristotle right from the get-go. There's a common confusion about what he means, and the confusion's not on your end, it's just the way the section we're reading is written. It just starts out a little confusingly because he comes right out of the gate in what we read and says, happiness. We're talking about happiness. Now, I bet a bunch of you read this. You're thinking like, oh, I thought we were going to talk about the death penalty and abortion in this class. Aristotle sounds like he just wants to know what feels good, right? He's just talking about happiness. Here's the thing, though, is first, what Aristotle says about happiness actually has a different point than what it seems to be. But also, let me make this crystal clear. You should absolutely write this down. For Aristotle, ethics is not about happiness. Okay, so I'll say that again. Ethics is not about happiness for Aristotle. This is just so happens that our excerpt from his bigger book starts with this section on happiness. But you'll notice there, Aristotle does not say that what's ethical is whatever makes you happy. And in fact, he says that if the goal of life is to be happy, even if the goal of life might be to be happy, his whole point in raising this is that we disagree upon what makes us happy. So let me just say it again. Ethics is not defined as what makes you happy, not for Aristotle. His point here is sort of, it's not counterintuitive, but his point is this. He says, human beings all agree on certain things, but we tend to disagree on how to understand or apply those very same things. So let me show you where that is in our text. It's page 17. Going over to page 18, and he says, all human beings agree that being happy is good. And he says, however, as soon as you start asking people what they mean by happiness, you get different answers. Common people might say, oh, it's relaxation. Scholars will say, oh, happiness is when you read a good book. People who seek pleasure are going to say, oh, it's booze, it's sex, it's rich, delicious food. So we all agree that being happy is good. Like Aristotle said, we all agree on some things. But then we disagree as soon as we try to start filling that in with some content. Or, to speak like a philosopher, as soon as we start trying to define what happiness means. You know, philosophers always ask the question, well, what really is happiness? Right? What really, So, he says we all agree that happiness is good and it's better to be happy than not. But then as soon as we start saying what things would be good because they produce happiness or lead to happiness, then we start disagreeing. So, students commonly misunderstand this to think that Aristotle is saying that ethics is about happiness. And hey, I totally understand that because the first part of his book about ethics that we read starts talking about happiness. But like I said, his real point is not so much about ethics, but this other point about happiness that he's generalizing to make another point, which is exactly that we all agree on some things, but we disagree at first on how to understand them. What he wants to do, though, is go beyond the disagreement. What he wants to do is see how much we can get to an agreement upon which things are actually really good. This isn't because he wants to make you think like he does. But part of Aristotle's concern is, and this is important for our class, if we have to live with other people, there has to at least sometimes be some agreement upon which things are good. Right? If you live in a democracy where the majority rule decides how we're going to live, what sort of things we're going to spend our tax dollars on, which wars are worth fighting and important to fight, and which ones would just be squandering blood and treasure in order to fight, then ideally we'd at least have some common ground, right? Some way to speak about things and come to some general agreement about what's good and worth pursuing and what's bad and ought to be avoided. So this is what ethics means for Aristotle. Ethics is about when we agree on some things and yet still disagree on related issues, such as we all agree that happiness is good, but we disagree about what things lead to happiness. Finding some way to discuss those things publicly with each other so that at least some of us will come to partial agreement about what we should do. So ethics for Aristotle is almost like politics. So, this little section about happiness in the beginning, the real point of it is this, and this is a good way to start our class, that's why we start with it, is that even though you and I might disagree about what's wrong and right, even though you and I might vote differently on which laws we think should pass and whatnot, still, we agree on some things, that death in general is bad for human beings, that health in general is good for human beings, that in general human beings should work together, that in general crime should be punished, right? We all agree on that stuff. It's almost impossible to find someone who thinks what I just said was wrong. Health is good, death in general is bad, human cooperation in general is good, crime should be punished generally, right? I mean, this is a class of 40 people. I bet we all agree on all those statements. However, when you and I have to live in a community together, if you call my behavior crime, but I don't, we've got to find some way to resolve that disagreement. Okay, and it's not about shutting down free speech or difference of opinions. It's not about a totalitarian government or some religious or community leader telling you all how to act and how to think. It's that if you and I are going to live together, if we're going to interact, we have to find some way to come to partial agreement about certain issues. So, Aristotle actually sets himself a very big task. He is going to try to find out. This is what happens on page 18 in our text. He is going to try to find out if we can find out if there's some basic thing, some shared thing that will make all human beings happy. Right? So remember, he says that people disagree about what makes us happy, but he's trying to go beyond that disagreement. He's trying to say, well, people disagree, but people also disagree about who's going to win the World Series this year. People disagree about what the best school in the United States is. But remember, I know this won't sound great off the bat, but this is part of what our course is going to force you to sort of engage with. Just because people disagree doesn't mean that there's no right answer. And I'll phrase that again in a different way. Even when people disagree, sometimes some of them are right and some of them are wrong. Now I know, especially in America, especially for younger people, being told that there's a right and a wrong and that your feelings might be incorrect in a certain situation sounds like someone's trying to tell you how to live. Someone who doesn't even know you, Aristotle, me, the cops, whoever, is trying to tell you how to live, and they don't even know you, and they don't know what's good for you. But it's not so much bossy, right? It's not that Aristotle's trying to tell you how to live. He's trying to see if there might be something that, in general, all of us share. Basically, he's trying to figure out if there's any shared human nature. And that's really the theme of our first few readings. Is there some human nature that you and I have in common that you and a Persian person, you and an American from 200 years ago, you and every other human being in the world, is there something we share in common? Now, the answer to that question is almost certainly yes. It's almost certain that we all share something in common. So Aristotle is going to try to move from what do all human beings share in common, and then going to try to see if we can find something that's good or will make us all happy that comes out of that thing we share in common. So I'll say that again. Aristotle wants to see if there's anything shared in common universally among all human beings. If so, there may be a way in which our happiness connects to that stuff that we share in common. Or another way to put that is what we share in common might be something which can generate happiness. And if it's something we all share in common, a shared human nature, then there might be something that will cause all human beings happiness as long as they can get access to it. Okay, so this doesn't mean that Aristotle is going to say we all have to dress the same, act the same, have the same job. There's plenty of variation, as we'll see later on. He just wants to say there might be some things in common that are good basically for all of us. Good or will make us happy for all of us. That's this stuff about function and reason on page 18. By the way, if I say 18a at any point, I mean the first column on page 18. Similarly, 18b would be the second column on page 18. So this section is very confusing. It's very hard to see what his point is without a whole bunch of other pages that we're not going to read. The basic point is this. Aristotle says there is something that all human beings share in common. Doesn't matter if you're 18, 88. Doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. Doesn't matter if you're an ancient Greek person. He lived about 2,500 years ago. Or a contemporary American. There are certain things that all human beings share in common. And you see this near the bottom of 18b where he talks about a rational principle. This is what Aristotle means by rational, and I would definitely write this down because it's not in our book but in other books that I'm not going to make you read. This is what Aristotle means by rational. He says, human beings have certain things they want. Okay, but we share that with other animals. The dog wants food and you want food. What's particular to human beings? This is what he calls the function of a human being there. Like our job as human beings. The function of a human being is to rationally think about the things we want. That's what it means for human beings to be human. We're the animals that think and plan out our desires. This is what Aristotle means by rational. Human beings think about what they want, and then they think again. They think about the best way to achieve what they want. And it's that second step, thinking about the best way to achieve what we want. That's what separates us from other animals. Aristotle famously defined human beings as rational animals. So horses would be defined by 4 legs and a certain shape. Cows would be defined by having multiple stomachs and only eating grass. Right? But what defines human beings, that is, our human nature, that is, the thing that all human beings share, even though we're different in many ways, the thing that all human beings share is that we're rational, meaning when we want something, we try to think about the best way to achieve that thing we want. That's it. It's sort of simple. So this is what Aristotle says, connecting all these things together. He says, all human beings want to be happy. That is, that's a desire, a want that we all share in common. But then you ask a scholar, well, what's the best way to be happy? And she says it's to read a bunch of books about other books. You ask an athlete, what's the best way to be happy? And he says it's to be really physically fit and get that gold medal. You ask a stockbroker how it is, what leads to happiness? And she says it's dividends, dividends, dividends. Right? So we all give different answers. The whole point, though, is this. We share two things in common. The desire for happiness and the attempt to find the best way to achieve that. The athlete thinks the best way to happiness is physical fitness and gold medals. The stockbroker thinks not the only way, but the best way to happiness is dividends, dividends, dividends. Okay? So there's the disagreement. But this is what Aristotle says, is that in different situations, different things will make you happy. However, there are some things, based on what it means to be a human being, which are pretty much always good for all human beings. There are other things that pretty much in every situation are always going to be bad for basically every human being. So, there is going to be a set of things which are usually good for human beings to do. And in different situations, you'll have to pursue them or try to achieve them in slightly different ways. But the basic goal is set by human nature. The basic goal to make you happy, there's a few basic things that you need to be happy. And I'm human just like you are. Those same basic things are going to make me happy. And go down the list for all 7 billion or however many there are people, the same basic goods are going to make almost every single one of us happy. Basically, all human beings need the same things to flourish or be satisfied with their lives. Now, you and I are going to go about them in different ways. So you and I both need food to be healthy, and we need to be healthy to be happy. You like spicy food. I like food with, a lot of cheese. Okay? So I'm going to eat pizza. You're going to eat, Szechuan Chinese food. But we still are aiming at the same basic good, health, in order to be happy. You can't be everything you want to be if your health is crippled. All right, so the basic goal is the same. The basic goal of health will make us both happy or satisfied. Right? There will be variations in how we pursue it, which is what we're going to see in our next class when we deal with scrutin. But the same basics are set in place by human nature. So, I'm going to ask you another question that will end this recording. Often the questions will be in the middle. They just happen to be at the end of the recordings, these two. Can you think of a list of things that you think basically everyone needs in order to have a happy, fulfilled, satisfying life? Your answer might be no. But here's the thing. If your answer is no, you're going to want to tell me why you think there's no basic list. Okay? So once more, the question is, do you think there's a basic list of goods, good things, that more or less everyone, almost everybody, needs in order to have a happy, fulfilled, satisfied life? Okay? If your answer is no, tell me why there is no such list. And if your answer is yes, go ahead and share some of those things with me. So once more, here's the question, and when the recording ends, give yourself as much time as you want to think about it, and then share in the class discussion board your ideas on this topic. Do you think that there's a basic list of good things that almost every human being needs in order to be happy, satisfied, live a full life? If not, why isn't there any sort of agreement on that? And if so, share the basic things you think we all need in order to be happy. Okay, so that's the end of this recording. When it ends, just reflect on that as long as you want and share it with the class. Okay, thank you everyone.